To learn more about the network, view resources geared toward different membership levels, or to get involved with future events, please visit our website at www.facnm.org. Now, we have Kenzie Hartt from the Ember Alliance on the call today, ready to discuss the basics of community wildfire protection plans. So I will ask you to give her a big welcome to kick off our presentation.
Thank you, Rachel. All right. Hi, my name is Kenzie Hartt. I'm a wildfire analyst and project manager here at the Ember Alliance. We're based out of Fort Collins, Colorado, and part of what we do is a lot of community wildfire protection planning. We also do There we go. We also do wildfire workforce training, and we have a couple fuels crews. We do prescribed burn planning across the country, and we do some CWPP training as well. We're a nonprofit focused on socially just training fire and restoring the relationship between people and fire on the landscape. So I'll start out with what a CWPP is and what a CWPP is not. Scroll back, rewind about 20 years. In 2003, after a series of large fires, Congress passed the Healthy Forests Restoration Act, or HFRA, of 2003. This is the enabling legislation for CWPPs, and it had 3 requirements for CWPPs. First, collaboration. There must be some kind of collaboration, and there are these 3 groups that must sign off on a CWPP. There must have prioritized fuel reduction, so the areas on the landscape that need to be treated, and there needs to be an emphasis on cross-boundary treatments. And third, structural ignitability. We have to talk about that and emphasize that it is individual homeowners' responsibilities to harden their own structures. If you'll notice, this is fairly minimal, which is intentional. It allows flexibility across the country because everyone has different fire regimes. So that means that different states were able to create their own slightly more elevated requirements. So for example, New Mexico has some additional requirements for CWPPs to be signed off in this state. This is a brief overview of them. You will need to look online for the full list of requirements. So CWPPs first and foremost are a process. This is a process that a community goes through to understand their wildfire risk and prioritize the steps that they're going to take to reduce it. Secondly, it is also a process to build repeated connections. So if collaboration doesn't already exist in the community, having meetings and creating a shared vision of fire adaptation in this landscape helps create and foster future collaboration. A CWPP is also, as the name implies, a plan. You must have planned action items in that, and to be successful, these items should be SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. A CWPP is not a legally binding document. It doesn't require anyone to take action, nor is there legal resource for failing to act. The only caveat on this is that the WUI definition in your CWPP may have impacts beyond the CWPP, and there have been some, it has to do with NEPA regulations, but that is the only caveat I would say to that. It is also in and of itself not a funding source or just a source for funding. You can plan for as many grants as you want, and we encourage you to apply for grants to get support for the projects that you're having here, but you need to also have a CWPP that can stand on its own and still be successful if you don't get all of the grants that you're hoping for. CWPPs are built around the National Cohesive Strategy, the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Strategy, which is comprised of 3 parts: fire adapted communities, which is of course a big part of CWPPs, resilient landscapes, which is another big part of CWPPs, those fuels treatments, and safe and effective wildfire response, which can be included when you're talking to the fire departments and counties. Typically, when we approach the process, we like to emphasize process over products. The document that you create isn't as important as the conversations, relationships, and shared vision that you're building. Repeated interactions over the course of the time that you're writing this leads to collaboration being normalized. We prefer to be inclusive for the partners that we're working with, rather than being exclusive. And we like it to be for the community, by the community, so the community themselves has input and can shape the CWPP process. So quickly, why might you need a CWPP? First, a CWPP helps you assess your wildfire risk, develop your mitigation action plans, connect with the community to both educate and listen to them, and have a specific time frame to help build and initiate those partnerships. It is a tool, and it's most helpful when you know what you're trying to accomplish. So when you are thinking about updating your CWPP, it's good to create a list of goals, or typically a list of goals for what you want to see out of the CWPP when you're finished writing it. CWPPs can be a good tool if you have a proximity to wildlands and open space. If your community is near them, then there's a chance that you have wildfire risk, which is of course increasing across the United States. If your project area, your community is somewhere between a neighborhood and a county, that's about the good size range for this. Any smaller or larger, you're going to want to use a different tool to assess wildfire risk and plan. And of course, you need to have partners to collaborate with. This shouldn't be a document that's written just in a black box or in a small room and then given to the community or given to the partners to work with at the end. So the process to go through a CWPP can be lengthy and complex. I'll go through briefly what a lot of folks use, the process that a lot of folks follow, and share a couple things you can do outside of that. So we start with community and partner engagement. That is threaded throughout the entire process, but we start and make a plan at the beginning. Then we do our hazard and risk assessments. So we identify where's most risk and what values might be most at risk. Then we do our prioritization. So what is most important for us to treat? And then we write the final document. So I'll go a little bit into depth on these. In community and partner engagement, you start out by building your core team. These are the folks that drive the process and are the main decision makers. They meet most regularly, and they're the ones moving the process along. Then you also have your broader partner group. You may engage these folks at different points, but these are all of the other partners on the landscape. And then you also want to think about in this time, how are you going to engage community and residents, and how are you going to use the feedback that you get when you engage them? If it's a survey, if it's focus groups and meetings, if there's other tools you want to use, how are you going to use that information? Risk assessments can look very different. They can be all over the place. It's easy. You can use either the New Mexico wildfire risk portal, or you can get custom wildfire modeling, or you can use the wildfirerisk.org from the US Forest Service. There are lots of different ways to assess local risk. You probably want to identify some values on the landscape. So this might be critical infrastructure. This might be socially vulnerable populations. This might be watersheds. There are things that your community is going to value that you want to identify and see how at risk they are, where are they within this potential fire behavior. And then you may do on the ground community assessments. This is going out and ground truthing the information you have if you're using fire models. Once you have all of your information from the community about their values and priorities, and you have your data from your hazard and risk assessment, you move on to prioritization. This is usually a couple of meetings where folks look at all of the information that you've gathered and make decisions about where on that landscape they need to treat soonest. Usually CWPPs, we plan for the next about 5 years, sometimes 10 years, depending on the community. With those priorities, you make action plans, so you get as detailed and specific as you can, while still allowing for some wiggle room for the folks who are actually implementing these down the line to make decisions and change things if they need to. And then you look at outreach and education. How are you going to share this? And last but not least, document generation. This is actually writing the CWPP. I do recommend that while you're going through this process, you write and review as you go. So when you've done a step, you write about it, do another step, write about it, rather than waiting for the end. That can make the writing very daunting and difficult. I also recommend sharing the process in other ways, such as using a story map, pullouts of the most important information for a CWPP to give to residents, community meetings at the end, things like that. Other things can also be included in a CWPP that I don't have listed here, and it depends on the needs of your community. So some things like you may look at evacuation hazards and congestion. You may look at smoke and smoke impacts, perhaps post-fire debris flows, so post-fire flooding, your fire response capacity, and any other areas that may need to be addressed can be included in these CWPPs. I'm going to hand it over to Abigail next to talk to you about CWDG and CWPPs.
Thanks, Kenzie, so much. Let me share my screen real quick. All right. Is everyone seeing that?
That's great.
Yep, coming through clear.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Abigail Plecki. I'm the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Coordinator for the state of New Mexico. And I've been in this role for about a year. And before this, I was actually a forester in the Socorro district working for the Forestry division as well, and helping, communities with their CWPPs at a local level. And I kind of wondered, where does it go next? Where's that handoff? So I'm really happy to be here and talk about the New Mexico regulations and where do those plans go after these communities turn in the final document. So, and how CWDG is really kind of changing the state's requirements and how we can better help these CWPPs throughout our state. Okay. So first of all, what is CWDG? So it's a new nationwide incentive to help restore and maintain landscapes, create fire-adapted communities, and improve wildfire response across the nation. So this is going to be a 5-year funding opportunity from the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. And what's really interesting about this opportunity is states have the opportunity to either opt in or opt out. So New Mexico is an opt-in state, meaning that I am now in the role of CWDG coordinator, and I can help with the implementation, the outreach, solicitation of this grant, and then a few other things, help out with the fire planning task force and other actions and outreach across the state. So in a nutshell, there's 2 avenues you can go down for this grant opportunity. There's planning projects and including CWPP updates, and then hazardous fuel reduction projects. That the caveat here is that they have to be specifically lined out in community CWPPs to qualify. So I think historically people might have thought about these CWPPs as maybe collecting dust on the shelf, but I think, you know, the new way forward is to really, you know, get the dust off. Let's get these plants delineated and really use them as a tool for these communities. So I'm going to highlight the planning projects just for this webinar today. But for a CWPP creation or update, communities have the opportunity to go for $250,000. So this is a rare opportunity for the state, well, for all our states, but for communities to really start fresh and update and enhance these CWPPs. Okay, so this is a new initiative. This is a new map. I worked with Randy Fowler, our GIS specialist, on this, and I'm really happy how it turned out. So what we did was just overlay the communities at risk, which is a plan that the Fire Planning Task Force comes out with each year to update the risk value of each community. So if they're high, medium, or low risk, you can see the dots across the state. And then I thought it would be a nice visual for especially CWDG, because folks have to have a CWPP that's at least 10 years up to date, or they cannot qualify for an implementation project, but they can absolutely qualify for an update as long as they're at least 5 years out of date. So here's a visualization of where New Mexico sits right now. And so this was a great tool for me to use to how am I going to outreach to the communities. So I pretty much cold called every single county that was red. So they had a CWPP that was out of date as of like 2016, and then or yellow. So they still qualified for an update. But yeah, 25 counties were eligible for CWDG application CWPP updates, and then 22 tribes were eligible for CWPP creation or update. So, and another factor here is the tribal hazard mitigation plans are also accepted for CWDG, but still just tribes can also turn in for an update on their tribal hazard mitigation plans or create a CWPP of their own. So that's a good breakdown visual. And then next we have, so we're sitting at cycle 2, applications are in, and they're actually going to be announced by the end of this month. So the stars you see on the map represent counties and one priority landscape who put in for a CWPP update. So hopefully these guys are awarded and their colors will change, and Randy will make a new map. And also noteworthy, Sandoval County applied for a CWPP update and was awarded for cycle 1. So their projects ongoing at this time. So cycle 2 is prioritizing CWPP updates to get communities up to date on their wildfire protection plans so they can implement in the next following 3 cycles. Okay, and kind of going back to what's the handoff? So once these communities work on their final product for their CWPP, where does that go? So once we have all the final signatures, and then the plan is turned into the local district office for the Forestry Division, and then that district forester, once they sign off, they bring it up to the Resource Protection Bureau. That's where my position sits, and it's the sister branch, no pun intended, to the resource management, the more forestry side of things, working with your foresters and district foresters. So once the Protection Bureau representative this year, and and since I have funding and in this position, it will be me and Vernon Muller, who is the Resource Bureau Chief. We collect the any solicitation for a new CWPP update or creation. So not just counties, but even smaller communities can create their own CWPP if they have a need for that. So once the Protection Bureau gathers, and we have the Fire Planning Task Force, which is, we have an annual meeting that all these representatives that you see will send one to a open meeting forum. So we meet, but before the Fire Planning Task Force will meet, we have a subcommittee that actually goes through each and every single CWPP that's going for an update. So that usually it's just Forestry, counties, Bureau of Land Management, and Forest Service, or excuse me, U.S. Forest Service will meet, and we make recommendations, or if there's new definitions that need to be addressed, like the structural ignitability Kenzie had mentioned earlier, or any issues fire pertaining, we'll bring it to the Fire Planning Task Force meeting. So, and as I mentioned, the Fire Planning Task Force, we meet once a year in November to finalize who, we bring our recommendations to this public meeting. So we have to solicit at least 10 days prior. So if you see us in the Albuquerque Journal or the Santa Fe, you can actually attend these meetings and bring forward any concerns you have to the task force. So, which is great engagement. So the purpose of the Fire Planning Task Force is to identify wildland urban interface areas most vulnerable to danger from forest fire, develop standards for building codes and ordinances, and then establishing standards for new construction. So that's going to be a hot topic for as New Mexico increases in popularity. So, all right. And we actually just came out with the push for CWDG had pretty strict requirements of we need projects coming out of these CWPPs. And then I kind of noticed with the old CWPPs that we have currently, or even the new ones going up for an update, some of these were just a little vague to mirror what the CWDG requirements. So last November when we all met, I kind of pushed for, we need to update this outline and checklist or overall requirements for these communities. Not only is it going to help them obtain funding sources across the board, but it's going to serve as a better plan for the community. So this, and the final just came out today. So maybe myself or Rachel can email the requirements and this checklist that you see right here. I'll be sending it out to our fire management officers and my CWDG network. So really, this next slide is highlighting what changed from the checklist that you've seen and used previously. And again, these 4 updates of we need to delineate the landscape post-fire, or any landscape changes that happen, that needs to be reflected in these upcoming CWPPs. More detail within priority projects. First of all, we need to include the who, what, when, and then even more data on the projects itself and what treatments are we going to do and what the timeline is for these. And then including inventory for wildland suppression efforts that could happen at the fire department level, and then wildland training plans for the life expectancy of these CWPPs. So that's what the task force thoughts, and they were approved, and now that is reflected in these new documents. And again, as I mentioned, CWDG is prioritizing CWPP updates and creations for cycle 2. However, if you have a community or you know of communities that could use an update, it's not to say that you wouldn't be funded for cycle 3. So you could reach out, we could work together and how to get an application going for that community and who could apply. So announcements, as again, hopefully this week or next, we'll get the announcements, and hopefully we see some CWPP updates across the state. But we have cycle 3, there's no start date, but we have, last year was August, so we can expect August. So if anyone has CWPP questions or want to get up to $250,000 for your community, please let me know. I have my contact information here, but that's all I really have. Like I said, I'm happy to answer questions about CWPPs in the state of New Mexico, CWDG, grant applications, or even fire planning task force meeting information. So please use me as a resource, and thank you so much to the Forest Stewards Guild for your time today and space on this webinar to talk about this. But I'm going to pass it off to Gabe Kohler for final thoughts.
Cool. Thanks, Abigail. Thanks, Kenzie. Yeah, thanks folks for being on. We're going to be able to do a little bit like Q&A at the end as well. So if you have like specific questions, we can kind of dive into specifics. So Kenzie shared a lot of kind of, overview and best practices related to community wildfire protection planning in general. And Kenzie works with the Ember Alliance, as you all know, and they've been doing a lot of different, courses and stuff across the West and kind of putting together best practices. So it's really great to have you on today, Kenzie, and have that experience and have a resource for folks that are kind of getting, just considering updating a CWPP or considering applying for funding, things like that. And then with Abigail working with state forestry and kind of understanding the Community Wildfire Defense Grant program, which is a really good way to fund a CWPP. We have just a lot of good capacity on today through the Learning Network and through the webinar. So what I'm going to share is about how the Learning Network, the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network, and the Forest Stewards Guild could assist you in writing a proposal to the Community Wildfire Defense Grant program. So we had some kind of upper level overview about CWPPs from Kenzie. Abigail introduced the Community Wildfire Defense Grant program. And I just want to let you all know kind of what the Learning Network can support you in when it comes to developing a proposal for a CWPP update. And so I'm going to share some slides here, just real quick. As I mentioned, so I work with the Forest Stewards Guild. We're a nationwide nonprofit. It's based out of Santa Fe. And the Forest Stewards Guild is the fiscal sponsor for the Fire Adapted New Mexico Learning Network. So as you all probably know, the Learning Network is an interagency, kind of interorganizational, we have private landowners and community leaders as well as, agency reps, but it's this kind of collaborative network. But the Guild supports the network by, applying for funding and kind of coordinating things like this webinar and other learning offerings. So I just wanted to kind of introduce this kind of structure that we have here in the Learning Network. And the Forest Stewards Guild also receives some funding to a program that's called the Community Navigator Program. And so this Community Navigator Program provides the Guild with some funding to provide technical assistance for proposals. So there's a lot of funding, as you maybe know, that's coming through different programs right now. A lot of them are associated with the BIL or IRA funding programs, but it's essentially infrastructure funding or Inflation Reduction Act funding that is coming through federal grant programs, and it's available to you all for things like community wildfire protection plans. The goal of this technical assistance that we can provide is to help you, be competitive with your proposal. So if you're interested in updating a CWPP, and you want to get some of the funding that Abigail was just describing through the Community Wildfire Defense Grant, you can work with me on putting that proposal together through that technical assistance that we can offer. So I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like and just get into some of the specifics. But I think like the big takeaway is that you don't have to do it alone. If you're new to seeking federal funding, it can be overwhelming. There's a lot of kind of, you have to get a sam.gov account. You have to kind of, know how to invoice and track in-kind funding or different types of things related to grant administration. And the Guild has been doing that kind of work for a long time. And so we have some best practices that we want to share with you and that we can support you with when it comes to not only proposal development, but also with kind of managing that award. If you are awarded that funding, we can kind of help you track and do some of the admin on it as well. So I'll get into some of the specifics, but if you're interested in a CWPP, maybe that's why you're on here today. Just know that there is funding to support that, and that's what Abigail was describing. And then there's also funding to support your proposal to that funding program. So there's a lot of support right now that can get you kind of underway towards a community wildfire protection plan. And then as Abigail and Kenzie mentioned, that protection plan, that CWPP, is a really good foundation for more development to reach out to new grant programs. And so maybe you already have a CWPP and you want to work with me to develop a proposal that can help you implement that CWPP. And we can help you with that as well. Are you all seeing these slides coming through all right?
They look
Yeah.
good.
Okay, cool. Great. So I won't go into the weeds of the Community Navigator program. I think I already kind of hit the high notes that it's about providing technical assistance. The Learning Network, which is supporting this webinar today, is all about providing peer learning and relationship building. This is a place for us to learn from one another about best practices, what's working well, what's maybe a challenge that we still need to kind of dig into. There's a lot of really good examples of effective programming across the state. The Learning Network can help you kind of not reinvent the wheel. If someone's already doing a successful home hazard assessment program or has already implemented a successful CWPP, the goal of the Learning Network would be to connect you to someone that can share that expertise with you. And so that's something that we can offer through the Learning Network. We can connect you to another member or a leader who's facing similar challenges that you are, or who's facing a similar CWPP update process as you are, and kind of allow you to talk to one another so you're not kind of doing it from ground level. You can kind of build off of their lessons learned. We have within the network a lot of different practitioners working on community wildfire adaptation programming. So everything from CWPPs to large landscape projects to kind of more homeowner oriented stuff that's like defensible space work or home hazard assessments. And so we can offer access to a wide range of different examples or programs that are kind of that you can look at and learn from. We also, like I said, with that kind of landscape treatment, we're involved with collaboratives across the state. There's, like the Fireshed Coalition around Santa Fe, the Taos Valley Watershed Coalition, the Cimarron Watershed Alliance is doing some stuff over in Enchanted Colfax County. So there's examples of kind of watershed groups that are working across the state to do more landscape level planning. And we can connect you with people that are in that sphere if you're interested in doing more kind of watershed resilience type stuff. And then finally, FACNM and the Guild and many partners within the Learning Network have experience with administering funds for, to manage a grant. So the reason I'm mentioning this is like, we're talking about CWPPs today. And within those CWPPs, you might identify things in these different categories here, and we can help you kind of figure out how to write that. We can help you kind of figure out, clear priority actions that you can put in your community wildfire protection plan based on experiences across the state. Okay. Lots of good capacity in the Learning Network. can be a great resource for your community wildfire protection plan update. It can also be a great resource for any proposals that you're interested in submitting. Okay. This is just some of the ways that we connect in the Learning Network. Of course, there's webinars like the one that we're on today, but there's all kinds of other offerings that we can, support you in. Okay, so this is just a glimpse. So I mentioned that we can provide technical assistance through this Community Navigator program. The biggest thing that we want to talk about today is how that technical assistance can support Community Wildfire Protection Plan updates. Abigail mentioned kind of one of the best programs already is the Community Wildfire Defense Grant program is going to be the best funding program for funding a CWPP right now. There's also a wide range of other funding programs that can support implementation, that can support other types of work outside of updating a CWPP, and we can help you navigate those. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to flash my email here. Here's my email. You can also reach out on the FACNM webpage here at facnm.org/community navigators if you would like to access some of this technical assistance. So again, just know you don't have to do this alone. If you're interested in updating a CWPP, we have folks like Kenzie who've done a lot of really awesome work kind of learning best practices, and we can help kind of pull some of that experience down to you and support you in that. Abigail can help you navigate some of this Community Wildfire Defense Grant funding. And I can even work with you on a proposal to that program if you're interested in seeking out that funding. So there's a lot of great resources on the call today. I encourage you to please take down my email. And then I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now, and we can just kind of answer any questions. This doesn't have to go maybe the full hour if folks don't have questions, but I'd be happy to kind of chat, and it's a small group. So if folks want to just unmute and just kind of ask questions openly, I think that's just fine. I'll remove this spotlight. Cool. So we're kind of at the end of the call, and just a little bit of a panel here, I guess. If anyone has any questions related to Community Wildfire Protection Plans, I think one of us, Abigail, Kenzie, or I would be happy to kind of try and answer that for you. If you'd like to enter a question in the chat and we can call on you, that's great, so we're not talking over each other. You can also feel free to just unmute if that's easy enough for you.
So while other folks might be thinking of questions that they want to ask, I did have a couple that I wanted to pose to everybody, and whoever wants to take the question, feel free to.
I see Brent just unmuted. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Brent, do you have a question?
Yeah, we have a cabin in the Jemez. It's part of a 50 cabin HOA. And I wonder if that's too small for a CWPP, or what the advantage. I've heard that that a CWPP could affect our availability or insurance rates, because that's become a problem since we're right up against the Forest Service land, and the fires become it's obvious there in the area. So
sure. I can speak just real briefly, and then I think Kenzie probably has some good experience with those kind of smaller scale CWPPs. I've worked on county level CWPPs predominantly. That's kind of what New Mexico State Forestry typically points to or references. For funding programs, that's kind of what a lot of folks reference in a funding proposal is the county level. However, we always nest, if there's a community level plan that is established, like for your HOA, we would want that to be linked in the county level plan. And you can also use that to reference more specific actions that your community has identified. So the county level plan, as you can imagine, doesn't get into super fine grain project ideas.
Sandoval's got a pretty big spread of of terrain, and so you can imagine, with a community level plan, what you're going to get is a lot more nuance, a lot more clear project ideas that become easier to fund, and a little bit more shovel ready, because you have the right folks kind of talking together, and kind of know more specifically what needs to get done and where.
At the county level, it can be more general, and that's kind of a challenge to turn that into a funding proposal or to like actually turn that into implementation. But I'll pass it off to Kenzie or Abigail if you want to speak about that as well.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the smaller CWPPs, those at like a fire district level or a community level, because I think it gives the community a little more power to shape their own landscape, whereas with a county, you're looking at a much broader scale. So I love the smaller level plans. I think if you have, 50 houses is not too small to write a CWPP with. And the only other thing I'd say about insurance, and there's not a lot of answers that folks can provide on insurance. Sometimes that's a bit of a black box, but the best way you can prepare to get insurance is by having your home and community well adapted to fire, so that the insurance companies are not concerned about insuring you. And the CWPP is a great way to outline the path to get there. Insurance companies have their own risk assessments that they use more than I think CWPPs. But again, I'm not an insurance representative, but
Right.
Yeah, doing whatever you can to be fire adapted and be able to show that you have a path forward is probably your best chance at retaining insurance.
And Fire Adapted Colorado, who is kind of like our neighbor network, like this is Fire Adapted New Mexico, and then Fire Adapted Colorado, is hosting a insurance webinar next week. Brent, if you're interested in that, it might touch on, some of the like how insurance industry does or does not use community wildfire protection plans, things like that. So I'm going to drop that in the chat if that's of interest.
Sure.
There's
Thanks.
a lot of conversation about insurance, and it's one of those things that like we're all kind of collectively, figuring out as we go. So this is going to be, I think, a really helpful webinar that they're doing next Tuesday, I believe. So I'll drop that in the chat. Oh, great. Thanks, Kenzie.
Oh, I think I messaged it just to you.
Oh,
Sorry.
that was just to me. Oh, word. I'll just repost it into the main chat.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I guess other thoughts, like where are folks at with this interest? Have you been a part of a CWPP update? It sounds like Brent, you're kind of like, curious about this as a way to kind of convene and get folks together, which CWPPs are really effective at that. Like a lot of the value, my experience is like, it's a really powerful process of getting people together to think about cross-boundary work. And it can really kind of catalyze action. You're getting together, you're sharing data, you're talking about what you want to get done and where, and then that becomes a really good platform to like work with me on a technical assistance to apply for funding, so like there's a little bit of a springboard from community wildfire protection plans towards actually seeking funding that we've seen in other places.
Okay. Yeah, we've actually done quite a bit in the neighborhood. Back in 2002, 2003, we did thinning through the FLEP program, which was through Forestry Guild. And then the last year or 8 months, the Cuba Soil and Water District, they offered 80% funding for thinning for defensible home space. And about 2/3 of the cabins have taken advantage or either have or in the process of getting thinned for that. So, and then the Forest Service, we worked with the Jemez district, and they've actually cut and piled around 2 sides of the Forest Service land that adjoins our home ownership or HOA area. So
awesome. Yeah, I know there's a long like the Jemez Mountains Firewise and like all that. There's a lot of long history of work over in that landscape, and
yeah,
it's awesome that y'all are continuing to work together, and really glad that you're on today. And if there's anything that we can that the network can do to support you in terms of like if you have questions about programming going on in other parts of the state that might be of interest, or navigating funding, things like that, like we're happy to kind of support that as much as possible.
okay, thanks.
And I just want to pipe up on this topic too and just say that the Fire Planning Task Force, this is a topic at the last meeting and something that our state forester is working forward on. Because it's not just the vegetation that's the issue. That's the reason why insurance is dropping. It's also water sources, emergency communication, but most importantly, the biggest chunk is home hardening. But yeah, I'm gonna attend that insurance webinar and learn more about it too, just for what we can bring here in the state. So thank you, Gabe.
Yeah, of course. Other questions that folks have? I mean, we can also go into some, I appreciate Rachel having some things kind of primed up, but if other folks have questions.
While folks are thinking of it, I'll just throw one thing out there that I think in the recording might be good for people who have questions. So for folks who are just getting started with their CWPP, where can they start with that process of outlining their goals? So are there some typical foundational goals that they can kind of build off of? Where's the best place to begin?
I would always say if you have an existing CWPP, the best place to begin is with that. You don't need to write something from scratch. If you have a foundation, and usually old CWPPs do have goals listed. If they don't, look around for neighboring CWPPs, especially if it's one of your first times writing a CWPP, find other CWPPs from New Mexico and potentially from other states that make sense to you, that are understandable to you, and that address the issues that you're trying to also address, and look at their goals and then bring those up. So we've had some that are like 3 basic goals, like, identify the priority forest treatments, identify the priority roadways, and identify the communities that need the most help with defensible space and home hardening. And some are as complicated as having 8 or 9 different specific goals that the core team outlines.
Mm-hmm. I would also I would just also point folks to existing, plans at larger scales. So like our New Mexico Forest Action Plan, whenever you can link to other kind of like our statewide framework, which identifies priority watersheds and some kind of key actions in those watersheds, if you can kind of tier off of that, you're going to be really well set up to work with state forestry and within their funding programs, because they're going to see that you're kind of aligned with that existing framework in the Forest Action Plan, and it's going to make it a lot easier to apply funding if there's alignment between your priorities and that Forest Action Plan. So really highly recommend looking at the Forest Action Plan and the Shared Stewardship Plan, kind of that tiers off the Forest Action Plan, which is like the state has the Forest Action Plan, but the Shared Stewardship is like kind of the joint planning between the Forest Service, federal land management, and the state. And so if you can kind of reference those 2 other like upper scale plans and show that you're like aware of priority watersheds and kind of priority actions within those watersheds that are identified in the Forest Action Plan, it's going to make you really competitive for funding, because you're tiering off of like the state's priorities as well with your local level stuff.
And also I would say, look at potential funding opportunities and look at the applications and the questions they're asking, and making sure you're aligning with their needs to get that funding too. So New Mexico Counties, BLM has a CWPP grant opportunity that rolls each year. And then of course, CWDG, there's resources and that fillable format you can look at the questions they ask.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any more questions pop up, so we can end it just a little bit early. I want to thank Abigail, Kenzie, and Gabe for coming on and speaking about this. Thanks for sharing all of this good information. And like I mentioned, this recording will be up within the week for folks who want to rewatch. And I'll also be sending out all of those resources. So thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thanks.